Welcome back, everybody. This is Eric here with Iraq Veteran 8888. Today, I've got some more 2A news for you, and this particular article comes from our friends at AmmoLand. I love these guys. They're always putting out just such great information, and this article really, struck a nerve with me, and I wanted to share it. And you guys know that Chad and I have not really made a gun gripe episode yet about the Bruen case. We are going to get in it, but this does deal with it. And I'd like to discuss it because I thought this article was just fantastic, and I wanted to share it with you and give some of my thoughts on it as well. Before we get started, I would like to thank our friends at Sonoran Desert Institute for supporting our videos. They're an amazing group of people, and if you're looking for a career in gunsmithing technology, you want to learn about reloading, some of the business elements of what it takes to get into the gun world as an FFL, they are a wonderful resource, great higher learning. Check them out. Their instructors are amazing. The programs are awesome. If you click the link down in the description box below, you can check out their programs and tell them we sent you over there. Sonoran Desert Institute, SDI. All right, we're going to get into this. Tombstone, Arizona, ammoland.com. U.S. Supreme Court, Clarence Thomas. The Supreme Court has only one job. That job can be multifaceted, but it's still just one job. The job is to look at laws and lower court decisions and determine whether the law or conclusion of the lower court is following the Constitution. Seems pretty simple, right? How hard is this? It should not matter whether a justice is personally pro-abortion or anti-abortion, pro-gun or anti-gun, pro-religion or anti-religion, or any other personal philosophy or beliefs that they may hold. The only thing that matters is that they fairly, rationally, reasonably, and faithfully interpret the original intent and meaning of the words in the Constitution and apply those words, intent, and meaning to the application of laws today. For decades, actually almost from the very beginning, some members of the Supreme Court have allowed politics and personal beliefs to encroach on the way they apply the Constitution. They've played games with the law, manipulated language, history, and logic to find creative justification for doing what they have wanted to be done, rather than doing the difficult but more straightforward work of applying the Constitution as it is written and intended, even when it doesn't comport with their desires or philosophy. It takes a special person to put their own personal beliefs aside and say, you know what, I'm being trusted with this very important task of making sure that everything that comes out of this legal system that is our country is constitutionally valid and constitutionally sound, and that doesn't infringe on the rights of people. No matter what my beliefs may be, the Constitution is our guide. It's our lamppost in the darkness. When we look and we see the light at the end of the tunnel or the light in the distance, the Constitution is the supreme law of the land, right? So, here we go. Justice Clarence Thomas is an exception. His decision in the New York State Rifle and Pistol Association versus Bruen, the recent ruling striking down the New York requirements that a person has a demonstrable need above and beyond a general desire for self-protection to be granted a permit to carry a concealed handgun in public is a demonstration of applying the Constitution correctly. Not only did he and the majority of the court reject New York's arbitrary need requirement, he, with their concurrence, also made the constitutional standard the lower courts are supposed to be using to evaluate any fundamental right claim. That standard is whether the law or lower court ruling comports with the Constitution. He gives no leeway for states or municipalities' pressing need or compelling public interest, but instead focuses solely on the meaning and intent of the words at the time they were adopted. Remember, this is going to be important moving forward. And Thomas's decision in New York versus Bruen made people angry. His concurrence in Dobbs, the case which overturned Roe v. Wade, made them I can't say that word, I'm sorry, especially when he called for a reversal of other SCOTUS decisions which employed the same questionable legal authority known as substantive due process. Cases depending on that theory include a decision regarding same-sex marriage and other regarding choices in contraception. The rulings and Thomas's objections to the theory of substantive due process triggered a flood of vitriol driven by justifiable fear that the legal foundation for those rulings had been undermined. The core of the insults, threats, and abuse is the idea that Thomas has a political agenda. In reality, Thomas is blocking and exposing the political agendas of others, not promoting one of his own. See, that's very important. By referring to the Constitution just as the sole and supreme law of the land, and removing yourself from the situation. You're just saying, well, what does the Constitution say? What does it mean? What does it not say? What does it not mean? When you just apply the black and white language of our Constitution, of all of these amendments and all of the things, in our Constitution, you're simply removing yourself from the situation. And by virtue, you're actually proving that, what has been done all these years is that they have, sort of subverted the Constitution in some of these Supreme Court rulings. It's a pretty safe bet that Justice Thomas doesn't have personal objection to people choosing their preferred form of contraception or consenting adults sleeping with or marrying whomever they choose. He objects to the use of a legal theory that he considers bogus to create a constitutional right where none exists, or if it does exist, it can be proven under a better argument than substantive due process. To Justice Thomas, it's not about blocking abortions, making it easier for people to carry guns, or interfering in the bedroom choices of average Americans. It's about faithfully following the Constitution. If the American people don't like the limits or restrictions of the Constitution, they have the means available to make changes to it. But the Supreme Court is not supposed to be a shortcut to amending the Constitution. That's very important. And Clarence Thomas is on a mission to not only prevent that sort of end run in the future, but to correct the abuses of past iterations of the court. That's why with this Bruin case, they're basically passing it back down to the lower courts and saying, hey, all of the things that you guys rule on has to be in the original spirit of the Second Amendment when it was written. When the Second Amendment was written, there was no gun restrictions. That's very important, right? It's not like, look, back in the day, you could have a privateer vessel, right? You could buy a ship, put cannons on it, and have armed men on it, and go around and do whatever you needed to do as a privateer vessel in a war, okay? And it was perfectly allowed under the Second Amendment, right? You could have volley guns, you could have cannons, you could have anything the government had, and that was the entire point of the Second Amendment. At the time, everyone had the same guns. The military had muskets, right? Civilians had muskets. The military had cannons. Civilians had cannons. The military had, ironclad ships or whatever, warships. Well, guess what? You could buy a privateer warship and be a privateer captain and help them fight the war as a private vessel, right? The civilians had access to the same firepower that the military had. So if we're holding true to Clarence Thomas's, justification and the way that he ruled on this, okay, that must, dictate that we should be able to have the same firearms that the military has, because that's in the spirit of what the original intent of the Second Amendment was supposed to be in the first place. So it's pretty important in that regard. Okay. While Justice Thomas is the most prominent example of this originalist approach to the job of the Supreme Court Justice, other past and current members of the court have shared his beliefs to some extent. Some, like Chief Justice John Roberts, object to disturbing established precedents because correcting them would create a ripple effect through the judicial system. They demand adherence to precedents, even when it's clear that precedent stems from bad decisions that have become the foundation of additional bad laws. Others are committed to the political or philosophical objectives to the bad precedents and don't want them reversed because that would go against their political views. While Thomas generally looks to the Constitution as it was written and at the cases that were decided shortly after it was ratified, he's also willing to accept duly ratified amendments, notably the 14th Amendment. In McDonald versus Chicago, which confirmed that the individual right to bear arms is a fundamental individual right that the states cannot ignore, Justice Thomas agreed with the majority that the right must be enforced against the states. But he argued against the use of incorporation under the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment. Instead, Thomas argued in favor of restoration of the Privileges and Immunities Clause of the 14th Amendment as it was originally intended when it was ratified. The 14th Amendment was ratified in 1868 in the wake of the Civil War to establish freed slaves as full citizens of the United States with all the constitutionally protected rights, privileges, and immunities enjoyed by all other U.S. citizens. But back in 1873, in a case that didn't involve race, the Supreme Court entered a ruling that gutted the core of the amendment. Here's the pertinent section of the amendment. And look, that's so important. I mean, we live in a country where at one point, not all men were equal, right? We would say we were created equal, right? I mean, but were we? And, we have a dark past in our country. We live in a world where, yes, people were treated very unfairly, and it's terrible. And to see something like this where they're trying to make amends of what's happened and try to solidify the rights of, newly freed people, I mean, that's an awesome thing. But it wasn't until a long time that they actually were able to be on equal ground with their contemporaries. And, I'm not even really qualified to have the discussion, but it's just for me, it's interesting to see, the history of the Supreme Court and the way that these rulings have kind of come down and what they've come down on. So, the Second Amendment, I guess here's my take on it, is that the Second Amendment is an intrinsically important right, because when you look at a grocery list, right, the most important stuff is at the top of the list, right? So you got the First Amendment, freedom of speech, Second Amendment, right to bear arms. I mean, look, those are two very important things, and that's why they're at the top. So you're going to tell this person who's been recently freed after this terrible strife and all these terrible things that have been done to their people over the years that they can't, have equal protection under the law? I mean, come on. So, yeah, there's a lot of things that we've had to go in and do some housekeeping to make sure that everybody's on the same page. And I would even argue that right now we're in a situation where many of us are becoming second-class citizens by virtue of our political views, the way we want to live, how we want to raise our kids, the type of friends we want to keep, what we want to put in our bodies. I mean, look, it's like slavery all over again, except they're just changing the definition. But at the end of the day, if you can be locked in a freaking cage like an animal for using a plant that grows out of the ground, are you really free? I digress. Section 1. All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. No state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. So why is it that freaking Congress, right, Chad and I are about to do a gun gripe about this very subject here in a moment, about this H.R. 1808, the new assault weapons ban. But the point is, how can Congress pass laws that don't apply to them? Now, of course, there's legal reasons that they can, but the point is, you always notice that law enforcement is exempt from it. Congress is usually exempt from it. Look at Obamacare, right? With Obamacare, Congress was conveniently exempt from Obamacare. Of course. So, I feel like those things are intertwined, and we need to have a constitutional convention, and we need to make it to where Congress, they're subject to the laws that they pass. They shouldn't be allowed to vote in their own pay raises. Anyway, I digress. But that, to me, that's just kind of gets into that territory. The court has parsed the section into three distinct clauses: the Privileges and Immunities Clause, the Due Process Clause, and the Equal Protection Clause. In 1873, less than 5 years after the 14th Amendment was ratified, in a ruling widely known as the Slaughterhouse Cases, the court delivered their controversial decision claiming that the Privileges and Immunities Clause only applies to federal laws on federal properties and did not protect all the rights of citizenship for all citizens of the United States, even though that was their clear and very public intent of the amendment authors and was advertised as such in the campaign to ratify it. In subsequent cases, the court has stood by this seriously flawed decision, but through the years, the court has effectively restored many of the intended protections of the Privileges and Immunities Clause by selectively and creatively applying the Due Process and Equal Protection Clauses. The decision in the Slaughterhouse Cases is widely considered one of the worst decisions to come out of the Supreme Court. So what this tells us is Clarence Thomas is not wrong to challenge previous precedents that are set by the court, right? Where, that's an important thing. It is unlikely that you could find a single legal scholar in the last 100 years who would defend the decision as right and correct. Yet the court has steadfastly refused to correct this glaring error, instead choosing to use creative workarounds. When the McDonald case came to the court in 2010, arguing that individuals' Second Amendment rights could not be usurped by the states, many legal scholars saw the case as a prime opportunity for the court to correct their long-held slaughterhouse error. Indeed, attorney Alan Gura, representing Otis McDonald and the Second Amendment Foundation, argued during the first half of his allotted argument time that the court should take his position. The second half of his argument time was planning to be focused on the court's more favored incorporation theory for applying the due process clause. In the end, the court allowed the NRA to intervene in the case, and the due process arguments were offered by their attorney, Paul Clement, who happened to have been the Solicitor General who argued for the government in the Heller case. The court ruled in favor of McDonald, but chose to use incorporation under the Due Process Clause instead of reversing the Slaughterhouse decision, of course. Justice Thomas argued at the time in favor of reversing Slaughterhouse and has consistently argued for Supreme Court justices to correct past mistakes and reduce their reliance on past precedents in ruling on cases. He doesn't argue this to advance his own political agenda, or make his job easier, but to bring the court back into alignment with the Constitution and hopefully keep it there. At the moment, Justice Thomas is the leading advocate for this approach, though there are a couple of other justices currently on the court who tend to agree with his position, at least to a substantial degree. But there are powerful forces that are adamantly opposed to Thomas's originalist approach. Those forces include most of the legacy media and the entire Democratic Party. They paint Justice Thomas as a crazed right-winger trying to undo all the good things the court has accomplished over the past 50-plus years. And they have riled up mobs of people who are now convinced that Thomas is the greatest threat to our democracy that anyone has ever seen. This is wrong, abusive, and dangerous to Thomas and our nation. So I ask you to join me in praying for Justice Thomas's continued good health and safety and for his efforts to rein in the courts to be successful. So that really lays down some pretty distinctive groundwork for what we see happening with the Bruen case. Now, Chad and I are going to do a separate gun gripe and elaborate a little bit on where we think this could go and get into Chevron deference and all of this flawed rulemaking that the alphabet agencies have been throwing around like candy over the last several decades. We will get into that in a future video, but I thought this was a great article because Clarence Thomas, has really, the media hates him and they've really treated him terrible. They painted him with a really bad brush, and when you look at how much they've mistreated him over the years. I mean, this isn't anything new, right? This was just like that nail in the coffin in terms of, solidifying their hate for him. But the man is just trying to get us to see the Constitution for what it is. I mean, we've gone so far off the path that we've lost our way, and he's trying to help us find our way back, right? If you don't like the Constitution, freaking change it. There's a system for doing it. But our founding fathers were very, very smart and very, very well-intentioned to set up the structure of this government in the way that they did. That's why we have the Electoral College. That's why we have the checks and balances. That's why we have the different chambers of Congress. And we have a process for making a bill into a law that, hopefully factors in the voices of many people from many different backgrounds. That's why we have a Supreme Court to keep the lower courts in check and to make sure that these laws, pass constitutional muster. We have these checks and balances here for a reason, to ensure that our natural rights and our liberty is maintained and protected for generations to come. I mean, that's why we have this system. If you don't like the system, why do you live here? Leave. It's just... I think that this Bruen case can really go places and roll back a lot of these anti-gun laws that we see on the books, especially at the state level. Assault weapons bans, concealed carry bans. I mean, we already see there's, I think, 7 or 8 states that have had to reverse their may issue, stance. They must issue permits. There cannot be some provision in place for, exercising your constitutional rights. You don't have to give a reason to exercise your rights. And I see this also being used to challenge the NFA as well, all right, because you're being taxed, right? So if you have to pay a $200 tax to exercise a right, well, that's a barrier of entry. Well, of course, they say, well, Congress can levy taxes, right, and all this stuff, but you can't tax rights. So there's already, I think, Mayberry versus Madison, and there's a few other Supreme Court cases, Virginia schools. There was one about ballots, and not ballots, but a polling tax is what I'm trying to say. I'm sorry, I misspoke, but they deemed a long time ago that polling taxes were unlawful, right? You can't tax a right because it's your right to vote. So there can't be a fee associated with exercising a right. Well, what is the NFA but a fee associated with exercising a right? So, the NFA is tricky, and I think that, this does open the door to challenge the NFA because the NFA didn't exist when the Constitution was written. The Supreme Court just said that lower court rulings have to be in line with the original intention and spirit of when the law was originally written. Well, when the law was originally written, there was no such thing as the NFA. There was no such thing as gun restrictions. So it's going to be really interesting to see how all of this shakes out. We could very well see all of these terrible things that we've been subject to for the last 100+ years start to roll back, and we start to restore some of those freedoms. And it all came from a gentleman like Clarence Thomas just saying, you know what? Let's just look at the Constitution. Like, it says what it says, it means what it says, and the Second Amendment is the most clear constitutional language in the entire document. There is no other provision in the entire document that says shall not be infringed, that gives specific instructions not to do something in a very specific way. So it was written in the way that it was for a very specific reason. So I hope that in time we can see that our Second Amendment rights are off limits, okay? I'm not saying there's not greater issues in our society that we have to confront. Of course we will, but we're not going to do it unarmed. I can promise you that. We're going to have the means to protect ourselves, protect our communities, protect each other. You guys saw the recent mall shooting where a good Samaritan stepped in and stopped the shooter with well-placed shots, good accuracy at decent distance. I mean, look, they just passed constitutional carry. The man was carrying his gun, and he stopped the shooter. So that is this concept in action. We need to see that at a greater level, over a greater span of different areas, and eventually these terrible things will stop as people start realizing, wow, if I do something stupid, some person's going to draw their gun and take you out, right? So keep that in the back of your mind. I think the Bruen case opens a door. This shouldn't be the final victory. This shouldn't be the victory lap, but it is revving the engine a bit. We got a long way to go. We're not done yet. But I wanted to share this article. I thought it was fantastic, and I wanted to elaborate on it and give a few of my thoughts. And I apologize for some of my mispronunciations there. Some of those words I can't say, and I apologize. I'm a redneck. I don't know everything. But anyway, hope you enjoyed it. Have yourselves a great day. Many more videos on the way. Go over to Ballistic Ink and pick yourself up a snazzy new t-shirt. That's one way that you can support our effort directly if you wish to. And again, a big thanks to SDI for supporting our videos and helping us put this type of content out for you. Have a good one. Many more videos on the way. We'll see you soon.